On this day, in 1885, a very impassioned and fearful editorial was penned and published across the front page of the Brisbane Courier, the precursor to our current Courier Mail. Whilst the topic of the article looms large again, ironically, due to the world's present-day political climate, one can imagine the panic it would have fostered in the minds of the 1880s residents of Brisbane and her surrounds. For some decades, distrust and tensions had been brewing across the world, and especially amongst the nations in the South Pacific, namely New Zealand and Australia, through what was perceived as the looming Russian threat. On the back end of the Crimean War, fought through the middle of the 1850s, in part due to Russia's expansionist plans threatening the Ottoman Empire's territories, Russia had continued to needle the British Empire. With the sporadic appearance of Russian warships in the region throughout the 1860s and 1870s, tensions continued to escalate, with a number of scares rippling across the country, backed by a suspicion that Russia harboured secret plans to attack and capture major Australian port cities. In 1863, panic ensued across Melbourne on the appearance of the Russian Navy corvette, the Bogatyr. At the time, the situation was not helped with news that the vessel was the flagship of Admiral Andrei Alexandrov Popov, the commander of a fleet of Russian warships stationed in the Pacific that same year. Further panic ensued in 1882 when a squadron of 3 Russian warships appeared under the command of Admiral Avrami Bogdanovich Aslanbegov alongside the Australian coastline. Visiting both Sydney and Melbourne on what will be flouted as a goodwill mission, imaginations ran rampant at both the ease with which the flotilla of Russian warships had approached and anchored off 2 of Australia's major cities, but also what might have transpired if a more hostile stopover had been intended. However, in 1885, fears of Russian hostilities on Australian shores reached a fever pitch. By mid-April, news rippled back through diplomatic channels that hostilities between England and Russia were imminent. Due to a further expansionist push through Afghanistan, Russia had captured a strategic Afghan border fort on the 30th of March, which England interpreted as a major threat given the fortification sat on a strategic route south towards their colonially controlled interests in India. As a declaration of war drew ominously close between the two powers, outlying stations of the British Empire, such as Australia, were placed on high alert, implored to stay vigilant against any potential Russian retaliation in their respective regions. As such, on the 29th of April 1885, the Brisbane Courier published the following piece. We must point out to the patriotic gentlemen who are offering their services as guerrillas that there is only one way to be of actual use in the event of an emergency. Every man who is to assist in the defence of Brisbane must be absolutely at the disposal of the authorities. Besides, whatever may happen, there will be nothing that by any stretch of language could be called an invasion. The Russian naval forces on this side of the globe will be opposed by all the British ships on the China, India and Australian stations, and could not hope to hold the sea even for a fortnight. They might evade the British fighting ships and make a hurried dash on our coast. Such a dash would be formidable if we were not prepared to meet it, but we are prepared. The only shore fighting we are likely to have would be in repelling a landing party which might try, by seizing Lytton, to get possession of the river for 24 hours. And if Russians do not make the attempt within a few weeks from the outbreak of war, they will not try at all, because the sea will soon be swarming with British cruisers. Any young gentleman possessing horses who would be prepared to place themselves at the entire disposal of the commandant if Russian ships entered the bay, might be of great service as scouts or messengers, but their usefulness would depend on the willingness to submit implicitly to orders. We venture also to question the expediency of increasing Captain Thine's volunteer corps as proposed. We want men who will enrol themselves in the regular defence forces and be prepared to go into camp for continuous drill if called out. In wartime, we look to the purely volunteer corps to swell the ranks of the regular fighting force, not to divert possible recruits from it. We are very reluctant to say anything to discourage the patriotic spirit which prompts the enrolment of the corps, but as our stock of arms and ammunition is not unlimited, it should be reserved for the regular force. While on this subject, we might suggest to the government to endeavour to collect, by advertisement in the northern and inland papers, whatever rifles or ammunition may be of private hands. It is not improbable that a considerable stock is scattered throughout the colony, which, if purchased, would be of service to the Defence Force. Fortunately, despite the seriousness with which the Brisbane Courier article was written, the circumstance which would become known as the Panjshir incident would be ironed out via diplomatic means between England and Russia without resort to hostilities. However, with the benefit of hindsight, and looking back now at the Soviet-Afghan War of the 1980s and current-day diplomatic hostilities with Russia, the geopolitical issues dating all the way back to the 1850s and the Crimean War no longer seem so distant.